The stolen F-16 screamed through the dawn sky at 500 feet, its pilot invisible to enemy radar, but not to the fury of her commanding officers. Captain Sofia Sparrow Martinez gripped the controls with hands that barely reached the standard grip. Positions, her 5'2" frame pressed against custom seat cushions that weren't supposed to exist. Below her, 12 American soldiers huddled in a bombed-out compound, surrounded by enemy forces and running out of time. They'd been written off as casualties by command. But Sparrow had other plans. The radio crackled with the voice of Colonel Harrison, her commanding officer, his tone somewhere between panic and rage. "Martinez, you are ordered to return to base immediately. You have committed theft of military property and violated direct orders. Return now or face court-martial." Sparrow reached over and switched off the radio. She had work to do. 3 days. Earlier, Sofia Martinez had been sitting in the same briefing room where she'd received dozens of mission assignments over her 8-year military career. But this time, the leather chair across from Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison felt different. The walls, decorated with photos of F-16s and squadron achievements, seemed to close in around her as she waited for what she already knew was coming. "Captain Martinez," Harrison began, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority mixed with discomfort. "We need to discuss your future with the 52nd Fighter Wing." Sofia straightened in her chair, her feet barely touching the floor despite the regulation military boots that added 2 inches to her actual height. At 28, she was one of the most experienced combat pilots in the squadron, with over 200 successful missions and a record that spoke for itself. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. "I'm listening, sir," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. She'd been through this conversation before, in different forms, at different bases, with different commanding officers. But somehow she'd hoped this time would be different. Harrison opened a manila folder, his movements deliberate and clinical. "The Pentagon has issued new physical requirements for combat pilots. With the advancement of our aircraft systems and the demands of modern warfare, they've determined that pilots need to meet enhanced physical specifications to effectively operate our most sophisticated fighter jets." Sofia felt her jaw tighten. "Enhanced physical specifications, sir?" "Height requirements have been adjusted upward. The new minimum for F-16 pilots is 5'6". Additionally, reach requirements have been standardized to ensure optimal control of all aircraft systems during high-stress combat situations." Harrison's eyes didn't meet hers as he delivered the news. "You currently measure 5'2", which places you below the new threshold." The silence that followed was deafening. Sofia stared at the folder in Harrison's hands, knowing it contained her career death sentence. 8 years of flawless service, hundreds of successful missions, commendations for bravery under fire, and it all came down to 4 inches. "Sir, with respect, I've been flying F-16s successfully for 6 years. My mission success rate is 100%. I've never had an equipment malfunction related to my physical dimensions. I've saved countless lives and completed missions that other pilots couldn't." Her voice remained controlled, professional, but Harrison could hear the steel underneath. "Captain, I understand your frustration, but these decisions come from the highest levels of command. The regulations are based on extensive studies of pilot performance and safety data." Harrison finally looked up from the folder. "We're not questioning your skill or dedication, but we have to follow regulations." Sofia leaned forward slightly. "What studies, sir?" "I'd like to review the data that shows my height has compromised any mission effectiveness, because my flight records show the opposite." Harrison shifted uncomfortably. "The studies are classified, Captain. What I can tell you is that the decision is final. However, we're prepared to offer you several alternatives that would allow you to continue serving." "What alternatives?" "We have an opening for a flight instructor position at Randolph Air Force Base. You'd be training the next generation of pilots. It's important work, and your experience would be invaluable. Harrison opened the folder and pulled out several documents. Alternatively, there's a drone program that could use someone with your tactical knowledge. You'd be operating UAVs in support of ground operations. Sofia felt something cold settle in her chest. Flight instructor, drone operator. Anything but what she'd trained her entire adult life to do. Anything but the cockpit of an F-16, where she felt most alive, most useful, most herself. And if I refuse these alternatives, then we'd have to discuss your separation from active duty. With your service record, you'd receive an honorable discharge and full benefits. It's not ideal, but it would allow you to transition to civilian life with dignity. The word hung in the air like smoke from a crashed aircraft. Sofia thought about her father, a Vietnam veteran who told her stories about flying helicopters in impossible conditions. He'd been the one who'd taught her that being a pilot wasn't about the size of your body, but the size of your courage. He'd been dead for 3 years now, but she could still hear his voice. Mia, some people will always find a reason why you can't do something. Your job is to prove them wrong. I need time to consider my options, sir. Harrison nodded. Of course. Take the weekend. We'll need an answer by Monday morning. Sofia stood up, her military bearing automatic despite the crushing weight of disappointment. Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. This isn't about physical requirements or safety. Studies. This is about politics and liability. Someone in Washington got nervous about diversity metrics and decided the easiest way to solve their problem was to raise the bar high enough to exclude people like me. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes burned with intensity. I've bled for this country, sir. I've put my life on the line repeatedly, and I've never failed a mission. But apparently, none of that matters as much as 4 inches of height. Harrison's face flushed slightly. Captain, that's enough. You're dismissed. Sofia saluted sharply and turned toward the door. As she reached for the handle, Harrison spoke again. For what it's worth, Captain, I disagree with this decision. You're one of the finest pilots I've ever commanded. But sometimes we have to follow orders we don't like. Sofia paused without turning around. Yes, sir. Sometimes we do. She walked out of the office and through the squadron ready room, where several of her fellow pilots looked up from their mission planning. They knew. Word traveled fast in a fighter squadron, and by the look in their eyes, the news had already spread. Sparrow, called out Captain Mike Bulldog Thompson, her wingman for the past 2 years. Hey, we heard. This is bullshit, you know that, right? Sofia stopped and looked around the room at faces she'd flown with, fought alongside, trusted with her life. These men had seen her in combat, had watched her save their asses more times than any of them could count. Their support meant everything. But it also made the injustice burn even hotter. It's not your fight, Bulldog, she said quietly. But thanks. Like hell it's not our fight, said Lieutenant Jake Viper Rodriguez, standing up from his planning table. You've saved half our loves at one point or another. You think we're just going to sit here and watch them push you out because some desk jockey in Washington decided you're too short? The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. These were combat pilots, people who lived and died by the principle that competence mattered more than anything else. They'd seen Sofia threat an F-16 through mountain valleys in Afghanistan, had watched her provide close air support that saved entire platoons of ground troops. They knew that 4 inches of height had nothing to do with her ability to fly and fight. I appreciate it, guys, I really do, Sofia said, looking around the room. But this isn't a fight you can win for me. This comes from way above Harrison's pay grade. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. She made her way to her locker and began gathering her personal items. 8 years of military life accumulated into a small pile of photos, awards, and personal mementos. There was the picture of her flight school graduation, where she'd been the only woman in her class and the shortest person by 6 inches. The squadron patch from her first deployment to Afghanistan. A letter from an Army lieutenant whose platoon she'd saved during a particularly hairy close air support mission. As she packed, Sofia's mind wandered to the conversation she'd had with her mentor, Colonel Sarah Phoenix Williams, just 6 months earlier. Phoenix had been one of the first female F-16 pilots, and she'd fought similar battles in her own career. "The thing they don't tell you," Phoenix had said over drinks at the officers' club, "is that being different makes you better, not worse. You have to work twice as hard to prove yourself, which means you end up being twice as good. But there will always be people who can't see past the difference to recognize the excellence." Phoenix had retired 2 years ago, forced out by her own set of bureaucratic obstacles. She'd warned Sofia that the military was changing, becoming more risk-averse, more concerned with regulations than results. They're so afraid of lawsuits and bad press that they'd rather have mediocre pilots who check all the boxes than exceptional pilots who don't fit the mold. Sofia closed her locker and walked out to the flight line, where her F-16 sat in its hangar. Maintenance Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez was performing routine checks on the aircraft, and he looked up as she approached. "Heard the news, Captain," he said, his weathered face showing genuine sadness. "This is a damn shame. You're the best pilot this bird's ever had." Sofia ran her hand along the aircraft's nose, feeling the smooth metal that had carried her through so many missions. "Take care of her, Chief. Whoever gets her next is lucky. You know this ain't right, don't you?" Chief Rodriguez said, setting down his tools. "I've been maintaining aircraft for 25 years, and I've never seen a pilot who understands their bird better than you do. You know every bolt, every wire, every system in this aircraft. Size ain't got nothing to do with flying, and anybody who says different is an idiot." Sofia smiled sadly. "Apparently, the Pentagon disagrees with you, Chief. The Pentagon's full of people who ain't never been in a cockpit during a real fight," Chief Rodriguez replied. "They make decisions based on spreadsheets and statistics, not on what actually matters in combat." As Sofia walked back toward the squadron building, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her younger brother, Army Staff Sergeant Carlos Martinez, currently deployed somewhere in Syria she wasn't supposed to know about. "Heard about what happened. This is bullshit, sis. But you know what Dad always said about fighting the system. Sometimes you gotta get creative." Sofia stared at the message for a long time. Carlos was right about their father's advice, but he'd said something else too, something about when the system fails the people it's supposed to protect. When regulations become more important than results, when rules matter more than lives, that's when good people have to decide what they really stand for. That evening, Sofia sat in her small base housing unit, staring at the official papers Harrison had given her. The flight instructor position was at a good base, and it would keep her in the Air Force with full benefits. The drone program was interesting work, and she'd still be supporting combat operations, just from a different perspective. Both options would allow her to serve her country and use her skills, even if not in the way she'd planned. But both options also felt like surrender. Like accepting that 4 inches of height was more important than 8 years of exemplary service. Like agreeing that bureaucrats in Washington knew better than the pilots and ground troops who'd seen her work firsthand. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed Colonel Williams' number. "Phoenix," Sofia answered, using her mentor's call sign. "Heard about your meeting with Harrison," Phoenix said without preamble. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better," Sofia admitted. "I knew this day might come, but I thought I'd have more time. I thought my record would speak for itself." "Your record does speak for itself, to anyone who's paying attention. But the people making these decisions aren't paying attention to the right Things, Phoenix paused. What are you going to do? Sofia looked at the papers spread across her coffee table. I don't know yet. The logical choice is the instructor position. It keeps me in the Air Force, keeps me around aircraft, and I'd be training the next generation. It's honorable work. But it feels like giving up. Like accepting that that I don't belong in a fighter cockpit. Sofia's voice carried frustration and sadness in equal measure. I love flying, Phoenix. I love the mission, the responsibility, the knowledge that what I do matters. Taking a desk job feels like dying a little bit. Phoenix was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of her own similar struggles. Sparrow, I'm going to tell you something that I learned the hard way. Sometimes the system is so broken that working within it becomes impossible. Sometimes standing up for what's right means going outside the normal channels. What do you mean? I mean that history is full of people who were told they couldn't do something, who were pushed aside by regulations and bureaucracy, but who found ways to prove their worth anyway. Sometimes you have to create your own opportunities to show what you're capable of. Sofia thought about Phoenix's words long after they hung up. Outside her window, she could see the flight line where dozens of F-16s sat ready for their next missions. In a few days, she'd no longer have the right to fly any of them. But tonight, she was still Captain Sofia Martinez, combat pilot, United States Air Force. And tomorrow, she'd have to decide what that meant. Sofia Martinez had been flying since she was 7 years old, perched on phone books in the cockpit of her father's restored Cessna 172 at a small airfield outside San Antonio. Miguel Martinez, a Vietnam helicopter pilot turned flight instructor, had recognized something in his daughter's eyes the first time she'd seen an aircraft up close. While other kids collected dolls or played video games, Sofia collected aviation magazines and built model fighters with meticulous attention to detail. Flying isn't about size, Mia, her father had told her during one of their weekend flights over the Texas Hill Country. It's about understanding the machine, respecting the sky, and having the courage to make split-second decisions when everything goes wrong. Some of the best pilots I knew in Vietnam were little guys who could barely see over the instrument panel, but they had the heart of giants. By age 12, Sofia was soloing in gliders. At 16, she earned her private pilot's license, making her one of the youngest licensed pilots in Texas. Her high school guidance counselor had suggested she consider more realistic career options, noting that commercial aviation had certain physical requirements that might limit her opportunities. Sofia had smiled politely and submitted her application to the Air Force Academy. The next day, the Academy had been 4 years of proving herself over and over again. While her classmates struggled with the academic demands of aeronautical engineering, Sofia excelled, finishing third in her class. When they moved to flight training, she outperformed cadets who towered over her by 8 inches. Her instructors noted her exceptional spatial awareness, her ability to read weather patterns intuitively, and her uncanny knack for aircraft systems troubleshooting. Martinez has an innate understanding of flight dynamics that can't be taught, wrote her primary flight instructor, Major Patricia Chen, in Sofia's final evaluation. She demonstrates superior judgment under pressure and exhibits the kind of natural piloting ability we see in perhaps 1 cadet out of every 50. Her physical stature is irrelevant to her exceptional capabilities in the cockpit. But even at the academy, Sofia had encountered the whispers. During her sophomore year, a visiting general had toured their flight program and stopped at Sofia's aircraft during a pre-flight inspection. "How tall are you, cadet?" he'd asked, looking skeptical as she ran through her checklist with practice. "Precision. 5 feet 2 inches, sir," Sofia had replied, maintaining perfect military bearing. The general had exchanged a glance with her instructor. Can she actually reach all the controls? Major Chun had stepped forward. "Sir, Cadet Martinez has logged more flight hours than any other cadet in her class. Her proficiency ratings are exemplary across all aircraft systems. The general had nodded dismissively and moved on, but Sofia had caught the look that passed between him and his aide. She'd seen that look before, and she'd see it many more times throughout her career. It was the look that said interesting, but not quite right. After graduation, Sofia had been assigned to F-16 training at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. The transition from training aircraft to one of the world's most sophisticated fighters had been challenging for everyone in her class, but Sofia had adapted faster than most. The F-16's fly-by-wire system actually worked in her favor. The computer-controlled flight surfaces meant that physical strength was less important than precise inputs and tactical thinking. Her instructor, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hawk Johnson, had been initially skeptical. A former Thunderbird pilot with over 3,000 hours in F-16s, Hawk had seen plenty of hotshot pilots wash out when they couldn't handle the demands of flying a single-seat fighter. But Sofia had surprised him from day one. "I've never seen anyone pick up air-to-air combat maneuvering as quickly as Martinez," Hawk had told his fellow instructors after Sofia's first BFM, Basic Fighter Maneuvers, sortie. "She thinks 3 moves ahead, like she's playing chess at 500 miles per hour. And her situational awareness is off the charts." During one particularly challenging training scenario, Sofia had been flying as Red Air, playing the role of an enemy fighter against 2 of her classmates in a simulated dogfight. The exercise was designed to test the Blue Force's ability to work together to defeat a single adversary. Instead, Sofia had used superior tactics and her intimate knowledge of the F-16's capabilities to defeat both opponents in less than 3 minutes. "How did she do that?" asked Captain Steve Morrison, one of the defeated pilots, as they reviewed the mission tape afterward. Hawk had smiled. "She flew the aircraft, not the other way around. Most pilots try to muscle their way through high-G maneuvers. Martinez uses physics and timing. She makes the F-16 do exactly what she wants it to do, when she wants it to do it." Sofia's tactical innovations had caught the attention of the F-16 community. She developed new techniques for close air support that maximized the aircraft's precision while minimizing exposure to ground threats. Her approach to air-to-air combat emphasized positioning and energy management over raw aggression, often allowing her to defeat larger, more powerful aircraft through superior tactics. During her first deployment to Afghanistan, Sofia had quickly established herself as the pilot other aircrews wanted for the most challenging missions. Her call sign, Sparrow, had emerged during a particularly difficult close air support mission, when she delivered precision strikes in a narrow valley while larger aircraft couldn't safely operate in the confined airspace. "She's like a sparrow in a forest of eagles," observed Captain Jennifer Walsh, the mission commander who'd watched Sofia thread her F-16 through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate. "Small, quick, and able to go places the big birds can't." The nickname had stuck, and over 6 years of operational flying, Sofia had proven it accurate. She specialized in missions that required precision, finesse, and the ability to operate in challenging environments. Her aircraft carried fewer weapons than some of her squadron mates, but she used them with surgical precision that often achieved better results than pilots who relied on overwhelming firepower. One mission, in particular, had defined her reputation. A squad of Army Rangers had been pinned down in a valley in eastern Afghanistan, surrounded by enemy fighters positioned in caves and fortified positions along the ridgelines. Traditional air support would have required massive ordnance that risked collateral damage to nearby villages. The ground commander had specifically requested Sofia. "I need someone who can thread the needle," Staff Sergeant James Parker had radioed from his position under heavy fire. "We've got bad guys in the rocks about 50 meters from friendlies. Can't use anything big." Sofia had arrived overhead to find a tactical nightmare. The enemy positions were scattered among granite outcroppings that provided natural cover, mixed with civilian structures that made target identification extremely difficult. Weather was marginal, with low clouds and shifting winds that made precise flying challenging. "Sparrow, this is Ranger 1-6, Parker had called. "I've got 12 Rangers taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Need immediate support, but we're danger close to civilians." Sofia had studied the terrain below, using her aircraft's targeting pod to identify threats while avoiding civilian areas. The solution had required multiple attack runs, using small-diameter bombs and cannon fire, each pass threaded through valleys that left virtually no margin for error. "Sparrow, you're cleared hot, but watch your 6. We've got reports of shoulder-fired missiles in the area," the airborne controller had warned. Sofia had rolled in on her first target, an enemy machine gun position nestled between two granite boulders. The required attack angle was nearly vertical, demanding precise timing and aircraft control. She'd placed her bomb within 3 feet of the target, neutralizing the threat without damaging nearby structures. 5 more attack runs had followed, each one more challenging than the last. Sofia had used terrain masking to avoid missile threats, had compensated for wind shear that could have thrown her ordnance off target, and had maintained constant communication with the ground forces to ensure she never endangered friendly positions. "Outstanding work, Sparrow," Parker had radioed after the last enemy position was neutralized. "You just saved 12 Rangers with some of the finest flying I've ever seen." That was pure art. The mission had earned Sofia a distinguished flying cross and recognition from the highest levels of command. More importantly, it had earned her the respect of the ground forces who depended on close air support for their survival. Word had spread throughout the special operations community that Sparrow, Martinez, could deliver precision fires in situations where other pilots couldn't operate. That reputation had led to her selection for increasingly challenging assignments. She'd flown missions in Syria, Iraq, and Somalia, often operating in contested airspace where enemy air defenses posed constant threats. Her aircraft had been hit by ground fire twice, but her superior flying skills had allowed her to return safely both times. "Martinez doesn't just fly the mission," observed Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Torres, Sofia's squadron commander during her 3rd deployment. "She studies every aspect of the operational environment, plans for every contingency, and executes with a level of precision that's simply exceptional. She's the pilot I'd want overhead if my life depended on it." Sofia's technical expertise had also distinguished her from her peers. She'd worked closely with maintenance crews to understand every system on the F-16, often identifying potential problems before they became serious issues. Chief Master Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, the maintenance chief at her home base, had come to rely on Sofia's feedback for improving aircraft reliability. "Captain Martinez knows her aircraft better than some of the engineers who designed it," Chief Rodriguez had told his maintenance staff during a training session. "She can feel when something's not quite right, even when all the instruments say everything's normal." That kind of connection between pilot and machine is rare. Sofia's innovations had extended beyond just flying. She developed new training techniques that helped other pilots improve their precision flying skills. Her approach emphasized understanding aircraft energy management, reading environmental conditions, and maintaining situational awareness during high-stress operations. During a red flag exercise at Nellis Air Force Base, Sofia had served as an instructor pilot for a group of international exchange officers. The exercise had included pilots from allied nations, many of whom flew different aircraft, but needed to understand F-16 capabilities for joint operations. "The principles are universal," Sofia had explained during the briefing session. "Whether you're flying an F-16, a Typhoon, or a Gripen, physics works the same way. Energy management, threat assessment, and precision employment are skills that translate across platforms. Her teaching had been so effective that several allied nations had requested her as an exchange instructor. The requests had been declined due to her operational commitments, but they demonstrated the international recognition of her expertise. Sofia's performance evaluations had consistently rated her among the top 5% of Air Force pilots. She'd been fast-tracked for promotion and had been selected for advanced training programs that prepared her for squadron leadership positions. Every indication had suggested a career trajectory that would eventually lead to squadron command and beyond. Captain Martinez represents the future of Air Force aviation, had written Colonel David Armstrong, her wing commander, in her most recent evaluation. She combines exceptional technical skills with innovative tactical thinking and natural leadership ability. She is exactly the kind of officer we need leading our combat forces in the complex operational environment of the 21st century. But now, sitting in her quarters with official papers that would end her flying career, Sofia reflected on how all of that excellence, all of those achievements, all of that recognition could be overshadowed by 4 inches of height. The military that had praised her innovation and precision was now telling her that her physical dimensions made her unsuitable for the very job. She'd been performing exceptionally for 8 years. Her phone buzzed with another message, this time from Captain Thompson. Squadron meeting tomorrow at 0800. Harrison wants to discuss the new height requirements and how they'll affect future pilot selection. Thought you should know. Sofia stared at the message, wondering if she'd even still be part of the squadron by tomorrow's meeting. The irony wasn't lost on her that they'd be discussing the very regulations that were forcing her out, probably without acknowledging that one of their most experienced pilots was sitting right there, being evaluated based on measurements rather than results. She walked to her dresser and pulled out a small wooden box that contained her most treasured possessions. Inside were her father's Vietnam service medals, including the Distinguished Flying Cross he'd earned for a combat rescue mission in 1971. Next to them was a letter he'd written to her before his death, meant to be opened when the Air Force gets stupid. Sofia had never opened the letter, hoping she'd never need whatever wisdom it contained. But tonight, with her career hanging in the balance, she carefully broke the seal and unfolded the familiar handwriting. Mia, if you're reading this, it means the Air Force has forgotten what makes a good pilot. Don't let them convince you that measurements matter more than courage, or that regulations are more important than results. You have something special, something that can't be taught or measured. Trust yourself, trust your training, and remember that sometimes doing the right thing means going against the wrong orders. I love you and I'm proud of you, no matter what uniform you wear. Dad, Sofia held the letter for a long time, hearing her father's voice in every word. Outside, she could hear the sound of F-16s conducting night training operations, their engines roaring as they climbed into the darkness. Tomorrow, she'd have to decide whether she'd ever hear that sound again as anything more than a spectator. Monday morning arrived with the kind of oppressive heat that made the Nevada desert feel like the surface of Mars. Sofia walked into the squadron building at 0730, 30 minutes before the mandatory meeting that would supposedly address the new height requirements. The hallways buzzed with conversations that died abruptly when she passed, replaced by awkward nods and sympathetic looks that made her stomach churn. The squadron-ready room was packed when she arrived. Pilots who normally showed up fashionably late had gathered early, creating an atmosphere of tension that felt more like a court-martial than a routine briefing. Sofia took her usual seat in the third row, ignoring the empty chairs that her fellow pilots had conspicuously left around her, as if her situation might be contagious. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison entered precisely at 0800, followed by 2 officers Sofia didn't recognize. One wore the eagles of a full colonel, while the other displayed the oak leaves of a major. Both had the pale complexion and soft physique of career staff officers who spent more time in Pentagon conference rooms than Aircraft cockpits. Gentleman and lady, Harrison began, his voice carrying an unusual formality. I'd like to introduce Colonel Patricia Blackwood from Air Force Personnel Center and Major William Chun from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. They're here to brief us on the new pilot physical requirements that took effect last week. Colonel Blackwood stepped forward, her bearing crisp and professional. She was tall, probably 5 feet 8, with graying hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Her uniform was immaculate, displaying ribbons that indicated staff assignments rather than operational flying. Thank you, Colonel Harrison. As you're all aware, the Air Force is implementing enhanced physical standards for combat pilot positions. These requirements are based on comprehensive studies conducted by the Human Performance Wing at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, in coordination with aircraft manufacturers and operational test centers. Sofia felt her jaw tighten. Here it came. The justification for ending her career, wrapped in official language and bureaucratic authority. The new standards establish minimum height requirements of 5 feet 6 for fighter pilots, with corresponding adjustments to reach and strength requirements. These specifications ensure optimal interface with aircraft systems and maximum effectiveness during high-stress combat operations. Captain Thompson raised his hand. Ma'am, can you provide specifics about these studies? Some of us have questions about the methodology and conclusions. Blackwood's expression remained neutral. The studies examined pilot performance across multiple scenarios, including emergency procedures, weapons employment, and sustained G-force operations. The data clearly indicated performance advantages for pilots meeting the enhanced physical criteria. What about pilots who are currently flying and have demonstrated exceptional performance despite not meeting these new requirements? Asked Captain Rodriguez, his voice carrying a slight edge. Sofia felt the room's attention shift toward her, though most of her squadron mates were careful not to look directly at her. The question hung in the air like smoke from a crashed aircraft. Major Chun stepped forward to field the question. Existing pilots who don't meet the new standards will be transitioned to other roles, where their experience can continue to benefit the Air Force. Flight instruction, drone operations, and staff positions offer meaningful career paths that utilize their knowledge and skills. With respect, sir, interrupted Captain Walsh, that doesn't answer the question. What if those pilots have perfect records and superior performance ratings? Are we really saying that 4 inches of height is more important than 8 years of combat experience? The room fell silent. Walsh had asked the question everyone was thinking, but were afraid to voice. Sofia felt a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment that her colleagues were fighting a battle she couldn't win for herself. Colonel Blackwood consulted her notes. The Air Force operates on the principle that standards must be applied uniformly. Exceptions to physical requirements create legal vulnerabilities and operational inconsistencies. The new standards are based on optimal performance metrics, not minimum acceptable performance. Sofia couldn't remain silent any longer. She stood up, feeling the attention of the entire room focus on her. Colonel, I'd like to review the specific data from these studies. As someone who's been flying F-16S successfully for 6 years, I'm curious about which performance metrics I've been failing. Blackwood's expression hardened slightly. Captain Martinez, I presume? The studies examined aggregate performance data, not individual cases. The standards are established to ensure the highest level of operational effectiveness across the entire pilot community. That's not an answer, Sofia replied, her voice remaining respectful but firm. You're telling me that my height disqualifies me from flying, but you won't show me the data that supports that conclusion. How am I supposed to understand the reasoning behind ending my career? Major Chun intervened. Captain, the studies are classified due to their operational sensitivity. However, I can assure you that the conclusions are based on rigorous scientific analysis. Sofia felt her patience evaporating. Sir, convenient how the data is classified when it's used to justify discrimination. Can you at least tell us which specific performance areas allegedly suffer due to height limitations? The Major's face flushed slightly. Captain, I'd remind you that you're addressing senior officers. Your tone is inappropriate. Captain Thompson stood up. Major, with respect, Captain Martinez's tone is perfectly appropriate for someone whose career is being ended, based on secret studies that contradict 8 years of exemplary performance. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Sofia realized that her squadron mates weren't just supporting her personally, they were questioning the entire foundation of the new regulations. Their reaction suggested that many of them saw the height requirements as arbitrary and potentially discriminatory. Colonel Blackwood raised her hand for silence. This discussion is getting off track. The regulations have been implemented by proper authority, based on valid scientific research. Individual opinions about their merit are irrelevant. Individual opinions? Captain Rodriguez stood up, his voice rising. Colonel, we're not talking about opinions. We're talking about proven performance. Captain Martinez has one of the highest mission success rates in this squadron. She saved more lives and completed more challenging missions than pilots who are 8 inches taller. How does height trump actual results? Sofia watched the exchange with growing amazement. Her fellow pilots weren't just offering token support. They were genuinely outraged by the injustice of her situation. These were competitive, alpha-type personalities who rarely agreed on anything, but they were united in their belief that she was being wronged. Major Chen's voice turned cold. Gentlemen, you're questioning lawful orders and regulations. I'd suggest you consider the implications of that stance for your own careers. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sofia realized that her colleagues were risking their own positions by supporting her so vocally. The message was clear: shut up and comply, or face consequences. Captain Walsh broke the silence. Major, are you threatening pilots for questioning regulations that appear to contradict operational reality? Because if you are, maybe we need to have a different conversation about command climate and the Air Force's commitment to integrity. Tension in the room was electric. Sofia could see that her situation had become a flashpoint for larger issues about how the Air Force treated its people, how decisions were made, and whether experience and performance still mattered in a bureaucracy increasingly focused on metrics and liability. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison finally spoke up. That's enough. This briefing is concluded. Colonel Blackwood, Major Chun, thank you for your time. Pilots, you're dismissed. As the room began to clear, Colonel Blackwood approached Sofia directly. Captain Martinez, I understand your frustration, but you need to accept reality. The Air Force is changing, and these new standards represent the future. Fighting them will only damage your reputation and limit your options. Sofia looked at the colonel, seeing in her face the bureaucratic mindset that valued compliance over competence. Ma'am, my reputation is based on results, not on following regulations that contradict those results. I've spent 8 years proving that height doesn't determine flying ability. I'm not going to start accepting arbitrary limitations now. Captain, you're making this more difficult than it needs to be. The flight instructor position at Randolph is an excellent opportunity. Many pilots would consider it a privilege. Many pilots didn't spend 8 years in combat, proving themselves in the cockpit, Sofia replied. Ma'am, with respect, you've never flown an F-16 in combat. You've never had ground troops depending on your precision and judgment. You've never had to thread a fighter through terrain that should be impossible to navigate because lives hung in the balance. How can you tell me that height matters more than the ability to do those things successfully? Colonel Blackwood's face reddened. Captain, your insubordination is noted. I'd strongly advise you to reconsider your attitude before you make decisions. You'll regret. Sofia felt something snap inside her. 8 years of biting her tongue, of proving herself over and over. of accepting that she had to be twice as good to be considered half as qualified. 8 years of nodding politely while people who'd never done her job told her how to do it. Colonel, the only thing I regret is that the Air Force has become an organization where bureaucrats make decisions about flying based on measurements instead of flight hours, where political correctness and liability concerns matter more than operational effectiveness, where proven performers are pushed aside to satisfy some spreadsheet in Washington. The ready room had emptied except for Sofia's immediate squadron mates, who lingered near the door, clearly torn between supporting her and avoiding the fallout from her confrontation with senior leadership. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Major Chun stepped forward. Captain Martinez, you're out of line. I'm recommending to Colonel Harrison that you be removed from flight status immediately, pending completion of your transition to non-flying duties. Sofia felt the finality of the moment. Her flying career was ending not with a glorious combat mission or a peaceful retirement, but with a bureaucratic execution in a squadron-ready room. The irony was that her crime was being too short to fly aircraft she'd been flying successfully for 6 years. Sir, you can recommend whatever you want, but you should know that every pilot in this room has seen what I can do in a cockpit. They know that your regulations have nothing to do with flying ability and everything to do with covering the asses of people who are afraid of making decisions based on performance. Colonel Blackwood gathered her papers. Colonel Harrison, I recommend immediate administrative action. This officer's attitude represents exactly the kind of resistance to change that the new standards are designed to eliminate. As the senior officers left the ready room, Sofia's squadron mates gathered around her. Their faces showed a mixture of admiration for her courage and concern for her future. Jesus, Sparrow, said Captain Thompson. You just ended your career defending a principle. My career was already ended, Sofia replied. At least now they know I won't go quietly. Captain Rodriguez shook his head. This is so fucked up. The best pilot in the squadron is getting pushed out because some staff weenie decided she's too short. Meanwhile, we're supposed to pretend this makes sense. Sofia looked around at her colleagues, realizing that her fight had become their fight. By standing up to the bureaucracy, she'd forced them to confront the reality that any of them could be next. That competence and dedication meant nothing if you didn't fit the predetermined profile. Thanks for backing me up in there, she said. But don't jeopardize your own careers over this. The system is bigger than any of us. Captain Walsh stepped forward. Sparrow, some things are more important than careers. If we don't stand up for what's right, who will? As Sofia walked back to her quarters, she realized that the confrontation had clarified everything. The Air Force wasn't interested in her performance or her potential contributions. They wanted compliance with arbitrary standards, regardless of the human cost. The organization she devoted her adult life to serving had decided she was expendable. Her phone buzzed with a message from her brother Carlos. Heard about the meeting. Dad always said the system would try to break you before it would change. Question is, are you going to let them? Sofia stared at the message, remembering her father's letter about doing the right thing, even when it meant going against wrong orders. She'd spent 8 years proving herself within the system. Maybe it was time to prove herself outside it. That evening, she received a call from Colonel Harrison. Captain Martinez, report to my office at 0800 tomorrow. We need to finalize your transition paperwork. Sofia looked out her window at the flight line, where F-16s were being prepared for night training missions. Yes, sir, I'll be there. But as she said the words, Sofia was already thinking about alternatives that didn't involve accepting defeat. Her father had taught her that sometimes you had to create your own opportunities to prove what you were capable of. Tomorrow's meeting might be the end of her official flying career. But it didn't have to be the end of her chance to show what she could do when it really mattered. The night sky was clear, perfect for flying. Sofia fell asleep too. The sound of F-16 engines, wondering if she'd ever hear them again from inside a cockpit. But deep in her mind, a plan was beginning to form, one that would either validate everything she believed about flying, or end her military career in disgrace. Either way, she was done accepting other people's limitations on her potential. Morning sun cast long shadows across the squadron parking lot as Sofia walked toward what she knew would be her final meeting as an active fighter pilot. She'd barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and thinking about the conversation she was about to have with Colonel Harrison. Her decision was made, but the weight of it pressed down on her shoulders like a full combat. Load. The squadron building buzzed with its usual morning activity, pilots checking weather, maintenance crews preparing aircraft, and administrative staff processing the endless paperwork that kept a fighter wing operational. But Sofia noticed the subtle changes in how people interacted with her. Conversations stopped when she approached, replaced by awkward nods and sympathetic glances. Word of yesterday's confrontation had spread throughout the base, and she could feel the mixture of admiration and pity that followed her down the hallways. Colonel Harrison's office door was open when she arrived at precisely 0800. He was seated behind his desk, reviewing a stack of official forms that Sofia recognized as transition paperwork. The sight of those documents, her career distilled into administrative checkbox items, made her stomach clench with a combination of anger and sadness. "Captain Martinez, please close the door and have a seat," Harrison said without looking up from the papers. His voice carried none of its usual warmth, replaced by the formal tone of an officer conducting unpleasant but necessary business. Sofia closed the door and sat in the same chair, where this nightmare had begun just 4 days earlier. The office felt different now, smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in around her diminishing options. Harrison finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "Captain, I'm going to be direct with you. Yesterday's performance in the briefing room was unacceptable. You showed disrespect to senior officers and questioned lawful orders in front of your peers. Under normal circumstances, that behavior would result in formal disciplinary action." Sofia kept her expression neutral, though her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. "Sir, I was asking legitimate questions about regulations that directly affect my career. I believe I have the right to understand the reasoning behind decisions that end 8 years of successful service. Captain, what you had was an opportunity to demonstrate grace under pressure, to show leadership during a difficult transition. Instead, you chose confrontation and insubordination." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "However, given the circumstances, I'm prepared to overlook yesterday's incident if you're willing to accept the transition gracefully." The word gracefully hit Sofia like a physical blow. They wanted her to disappear quietly, to accept discrimination with dignity, to smile while they destroyed her career based on arbitrary measurements. The request was reasonable from a bureaucratic perspective, but it felt like a betrayal of everything she'd worked for. "Sir, what exactly does accepting the transition gracefully mean?" Harrison opened the folder and pulled out several documents. "It means signing these papers today, accepting the flight instructor position at Randolph Air Force Base, and completing your transition without further disruption to squadron operations. You'd report to your new assignment within 30 days, with a commendation letter recognizing your service and contributions to this unit." Sofia stared at the papers, seeing her future laid out in official language and bureaucratic precision. Flight instructor at Randolph meant teaching basic flying to new pilots, far from combat operations, far from the missions that had defined her identity for 8 years. It was honorable work, but it felt like exile. "And if I refuse?" Harrison's expression hardened. "Then we process your separation from active duty. You'd receive an honorable discharge and full benefits, but your military career would be over. Given yesterday's incident, I doubt you'd receive the kind of recommendations that would help in civilian aviation careers. The threat was subtle but clear. Accept exile to a training base, or face complete separation from military aviation with a tainted reputation. Either way, her combat flying career was finished, but the terms of her surrender would determine her future options. Sofia thought about her father's letter, about his advice to trust herself, and remember that sometimes doing the right thing meant going against wrong orders. But what was the right thing in this situation? Fighting the system had already cost her everything she'd worked for. Continuing to resist would only make her transition more difficult and potentially damage the careers of colleagues who'd supported her. Sir, I need to understand something. The height requirement that's ending my career, when was it actually implemented? Harrison consulted his notes. The new standards were finalized 6 months ago and took effect last week. All current pilots had that time period to request exemptions or begin transition planning. But no one informed pilots about the new requirements until after they were implemented. The policy development process was classified to prevent premature speculation and rumors. Affected personnel were notified as soon as the standards became official. Sofia felt her anger building again. They developed regulations in secret that would end careers, then announce them as fait accompli with no opportunity for input from the people most affected. The process was designed to prevent resistance, not to ensure good policy. Sir, how many pilots service-wide are affected by these new height requirements? Harrison hesitated. I don't have those numbers readily available. But you must have some idea. Are we talking about dozens of pilots? Hundreds? Captain, those statistics aren't relevant to your individual situation. Sofia realized that Harrison either didn't know or wasn't authorized to share information about the broader impact of the new regulations. Her case wasn't isolated. There were probably dozens of experienced pilots being forced out simultaneously, all for the same arbitrary reason. Sir, I'd like to request a formal review of my case. If these regulations are based on performance data, I should have the right to present my own performance record for consideration. Harrison shook his head. Captain, the regulations don't provide for individual exemptions based on performance. The standards are applied uniformly across all personnel, even when uniform application produces clearly inferior results. Captain, you're arguing with decisions that have been made at levels far above both of our pay grades. The Secretary of Defense has approved these standards. They're not subject to revision based on individual preferences. Sofia stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the flight line. Outside, maintenance crews were preparing F-16s for the day's training missions. In a few hours, pilots would be strapping into those aircraft and taking off for combat training that might save their lives in real operations. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was being prevented from contributing to that training because of 4 inches of height. Sir, what would happen if I simply refused to sign the transition papers? Harrison's voice took on a warning tone. Captain, I wouldn't recommend that course of action. Refusing lawful orders would result in disciplinary action that could affect your discharge characterization and future benefits. Sofia turned back to face her commanding officer. So my choices are exile to a training base, separation from the Air Force, or court-martial for refusing orders that I believe are fundamentally wrong? Captain, those aren't the terms I would use, but essentially, yes. You can transition gracefully to a new role, separate honorably from active duty, or face the consequences of continued insubordination. The finality of the situation crystallized in Sofia's mind. 8 years of exceptional service had earned her the privilege of choosing how her career would end, but none of the options involved continuing to do the job she loved and excelled at. The system had decided she was expendable, and no amount of performance or dedication could change that calculation. Sofia sat back down and picked up the transition papers. The language was formal and bureaucratic, full of phrases like, "in the best interests of the service and optimal utilization of personnel resources." Reading between the lines, she could see that accepting the instructor position would include a gag order. She'd be expected to support the new regulations publicly and avoid criticizing the policy that had ended her combat career. "Sir, if I sign these papers, am I prohibited from discussing my situation publicly?" Harrison consulted another document. "You'd be expected to maintain appropriate military bearing and avoid statements that could undermine confidence in Air Force policies. Standard professional conduct requirements." Translation: shut up and go away quietly. Don't embarrass the Air Force by pointing out the injustice of your situation. Pretend that discrimination is just another policy adjustment that professionals accept without complaint. Sofia's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it discreetly and saw that it was from her brother Carlos. "Emergency developing in Syria. My unit may need immediate air support. Pray we get someone good if it goes hot." The timing of the message felt like divine intervention. While she sat in an office arguing about her future, real soldiers were facing real dangers that required the kind of precision air support she'd spent 8 years perfecting. The disconnect between bureaucratic procedures and operational reality had never been more stark. "Sir, can I have 24 hours to consider my options?" Harrison checked his calendar. "Captain, I need a decision today. The personnel office requires immediate action on your case, and further delays will only complicate the administrative process." Sofia realized that even the timing of her decision was being controlled by bureaucratic convenience rather than her needs. Everything about this process was designed to push her toward quick compliance with minimal resistance. "Then I need a few minutes to review these documents carefully." "Of course, take whatever time you need." Sofia read through the papers systematically, noting the implications of each section. The flight instructor position would be a significant demotion in terms of mission importance, but it would preserve her military benefits and provide some job security. The separation option offered complete freedom from military constraints, but would end her aviation career permanently. Both options required her to accept the fundamental premise that her height made her unsuitable for combat flying, despite 8 years of evidence to the contrary. Both options validated a bureaucratic decision that prioritized arbitrary measurements over demonstrated competence. As she read, Sofia thought about the conversation she'd had with her squadron mates over the past few days. Their support had been overwhelming, but it had also revealed something troubling about the current state of military aviation. Too many good pilots were being pushed aside for reasons that had nothing to do with their ability to fly and fight. Effectively. Her phone buzzed again with another message from Carlos. "Situation deteriorating. May need immediate extraction support. Hope whoever they send knows mountain flying." Sofia stared at the message, realizing that her brother's unit might actually need the kind of support she'd specialized in providing. Somewhere in Syria, American soldiers might be depending on air support from pilots who didn't have her experience with challenging terrain and precision operations. The thought of experienced pilots being sidelined while less experienced aviators handled critical missions was almost unbearable. She looked up at Colonel Harrison, who was pretending to review other paperwork while obviously waiting for her decision. The man across from her wasn't evil or malicious. He was just another officer following orders from above, implementing policies he probably didn't fully understand or support. "Sir, I have one final question. If I accept the instructor position, would I be eligible for any special assignments that might utilize my combat experience?" Harrison looked up hopefully, apparently interpreting her question as a sign that she was ready to accept the transition. "There are opportunities for instructor pilots to participate in advanced training programs, red flag exercises, and international exchange assignments. Your experience would be valuable in those contexts. Sofia nodded, but she was thinking about different kinds of assignments, the kind that might arise if American forces needed immediate support in challenging operational environments. The kind where bureaucratic regulations might matter less than proven ability to get the job done. Sir, I need to make a phone call before I sign anything. Personal matter that might affect my decision. Harrison glanced at his watch. Make it brief, Captain. I have another meeting in 15 minutes. Sofia stepped outside the office and called her brother's number. It went straight to voicemail, which probably meant he was either in a secure facility or already on a mission. She left a quick message. Carlos, it's Sofia. I'm thinking about you and your guys. Be safe, and remember what Dad said about family watching out for family. When she returned to Harrison's office, Sofia had made her decision, but it wasn't one of the options he'd presented to her. Sir, I'm not ready to sign these papers today. I need more time to consider the implications of this decision for my future and my family. Harrison's expression darkened. Captain, I told you that delays aren't acceptable. The personnel office requires immediate action. Then tell the personnel office that Captain Martinez is taking leave to address a family emergency. I have 30 days of accrued leave, and I'm requesting permission to use it while I sort out my personal situation. Sofia knew that taking leave wouldn't change the underlying problem, but it would buy her time to explore alternatives that didn't involve accepting discrimination as the price of continued service. Her father had taught her that sometimes you had to create your own opportunities to prove what you were capable of. Maybe it was time to put that lesson to the test. Captain, this is highly irregular. Taking leave to avoid making required decisions is not acceptable. Sir, I'm not avoiding anything. I'm taking time to ensure that I make the right decision for my career and my family. 30 days of leave is my right as an officer, and I'm formally requesting permission to use it. Harrison stared at her for a long moment, clearly recognizing that she was maneuvering to maintain her options while avoiding outright insubordination. Captain, when you return from leave, this issue will still need to be resolved. Nothing will have changed. Sofia met his gaze steadily. Sir, sometimes 30 days can change everything. The 30 days of leave passed like a slow-motion nightmare. Sofia spent the first week at her apartment, alternating between fury and despair as she researched her legal options and contacted advocacy groups. Every phone call ended the same way. Sympathetic voices explaining that military regulations were difficult to challenge, that individual cases rarely succeeded against institutional policies, and that her best option was probably to accept the transition gracefully docked by the second week. Sofia had driven to San Antonio to visit her father's grave and the small airfield where she'd first learned to fly. Standing beside the weathered headstone, she'd read his letter again, focusing on the line about trusting herself and remembering that sometimes doing the right thing meant going against wrong orders. The words had taken on new meaning as she'd watched civilian pilots taking off and landing on the same runway, where she'd soloed 15 years earlier. The third week brought a series of increasingly urgent messages from Colonel Harrison's office, reminding her that her leave was temporary, and that her transition paperwork still required completion. Each message carried a slightly more threatening tone, making it clear that further delays would result in administrative action that could affect her discharge characterization. But it was during the fourth week that everything changed. Sofia was in her kitchen, drinking coffee and reading yet another rejection letter from a military law advocacy group when her phone rang. The caller ID showed her brother's number, and she answered with relief at hearing from him after weeks of sporadic communication. Carlos, thank God. I've been worried sick. How are things over there? Her brother's voice was tight with stress. Sofia, we have a problem, a big one. My unit is trapped in the mountains near the Syrian border. We went in to extract some intelligence assets, But the situation went to hell. Weather's closing in, enemy forces have us surrounded, and our air support got called away for a higher priority mission. Sofia felt her pulse quicken. What's your exact situation? 12 Rangers pinned down in a valley about 30 kilometers from the Turkish border. We've got 2 wounded, limited ammunition, and bad guys on the ridgelines with a clear view of any extraction route. The weather's getting worse by the hour, low clouds, high winds, visibility dropping fast. Sofia was already moving toward her laptop, pulling up satellite maps of the region. What kind of air support do you have available? Carlos's voice carried frustration and fear. That's the problem. The nearest F-16s are based in Turkey, but they don't have pilots qualified for this kind of terrain. The weather conditions are beyond what most of these guys have ever seen. Command is talking about waiting for the storm to pass, but we don't have that kind of time. Sofia studied the terrain on her screen, recognizing the type of mountainous environment where she'd excelled during her deployments. Narrow valleys, rapidly changing weather, precision flying required to avoid both enemy fire and terrain obstacles. It was exactly the kind of mission she'd specialized in, the kind where her size and precision flying skills had proven invaluable. Carlos, who's the air mission commander for your area? Colonel Patricia Stone, out of Incirlik. But Sofia, what are you thinking? You're on leave, remember? You're not even cleared for combat operations anymore. Sofia felt something crystallize in her mind. Her brother and 11 other Rangers were going to die because bureaucrats had decided. She was too short to fly the missions she'd been flying successfully for 8 years. Meanwhile, pilots who met the new height requirements didn't have the experience or skills to operate in the challenging conditions that were keeping ground forces trapped. Carlos, I need you to give me Colonel Stone's direct number. I'm going to call her. Sofia, you can't be serious. You'd be throwing away your entire career. My career is already over, but your life doesn't have to be. After Carlos hung up, Sofia sat staring at Colonel Stone's number for 30 minutes. Making this call would cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But the alternative was letting her brother and his unit die because she was afraid of the consequences of doing her job. She dialed the number. Colonel Stone. The voice was crisp, professional, with an edge of stress that suggested the situation in Syria was weighing heavily on the air mission commander. Ma'am, this is Captain Sofia Martinez, currently assigned to Nellis Air Force Base. I understand you have a ground unit in distress that requires immediate air support. There was a pause. Captain, how did you get this number, and why are you calling me about operational matters? Ma'am, my brother is Staff Sergeant Carlos Martinez, currently trapped with his Ranger unit in the mountains near the Syrian border. I'm calling because I have extensive experience with precision air support in mountainous terrain, and I believe I can help with the extraction. Captain Martinez, are you currently on active flying status? Sofia took a deep breath. Ma'am, I'm currently on leave pending administrative transition, but I maintain all my flight qualifications and security clearances. More importantly, I've flown dozens of missions in similar terrain and weather conditions. Colonel Stone's voice carried a mixture of interest and skepticism. Captain, explain your qualifications. For the next 10 minutes, Sofia detailed her experience with mountain flying, precision close air support, and operations in challenging weather conditions. She described specific missions in Afghanistan where she'd provided support in terrain similar to what Carlos had described, emphasizing her success rate and the lives she'd saved. Captain, your experience is impressive, but you're not assigned to this theater. I can't just authorize unauthorized personnel to fly combat missions. Ma'am, with respect, you have 12 Rangers who are going to die if they don't get air support soon. The weather window is closing, and according to my brother, your current pilots don't have the experience to operate in these conditions safely. There was a long silence. Sofia could hear background conversations and radio chatter. suggesting that Colonel Stone was in the middle of a crisis management situation with multiple moving parts and deteriorating options. Captain Martinez, even if I wanted to authorize your participation, you'd need to get to Turkey, get checked out in our aircraft, and be briefed on the tactical situation. That would take days we don't have. Sofia had been thinking about this problem since Carlos first called. Ma'am, I'm currently at Nellis, which has F-16S configured similarly to your theater aircraft. I could be airborne and headed to Turkey within 6 hours. With aerial refueling, I could be in your area of operations before the weather completely closes the window. Captain, you're talking about stealing an aircraft from Nellis Air Force Base. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sofia realized that Colonel Stone understood exactly what she was proposing and was giving her a chance to back down before she committed to an irreversible course of action. Ma'am, I'm talking about using available resources to save American lives. If that requires creative interpretation of regulations, then so be it. Another long pause. Sofia could hear muffled conversations in the background, probably Colonel Stone consulting with her staff about options and risks. Captain, if you were to hypothetically arrive in my theater with an aircraft, I would need absolute assurance of your capabilities. One mistake in those mountains would result in additional casualties we can't afford. Ma'am, I've flown 180 combat missions without a single accident or incident. I've provided close air support in terrain identical to what my brother described. I know I can get those Rangers out. Colonel Stone's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Captain, I never had this conversation with you. But if an F-16 were to appear in my airspace with a pilot qualified for mountain rescue operations, I would be obligated to utilize all available resources to save American lives. The line went dead. Sofia stared at her phone, realizing that she'd just received unofficial authorization to steal a military aircraft and fly it into a combat zone. The magnitude of what she was contemplating hit her like a physical blow: court-martial, prison time, the end of not just her career but her freedom. But the alternative was letting her brother die. Sofia spent the next hour making preparations. She called her bank to ensure her affairs were in order, wrote a letter to her mother explaining her decision, and packed a small bag with personal items she might want in prison. Every action felt surreal, like she was preparing for her own execution. At 1400 hours, she drove onto Nellis Air Force Base using her valid ID card. Her leave status meant she wasn't supposed to be near operational aircraft, but base security had no reason to question a familiar face with proper credentials. She parked near the squadron building and walked casually toward the flight line, where several F-16s sat ready for afternoon training missions. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez was performing routine maintenance on her former aircraft, the same F-16 she'd flown for 3 years before the height controversy erupted. He looked up as she approached, his expression showing surprise and concern. Captain Martinez, what are you doing here? I thought you were on leave. I am, Chief, but I need to check something on my old bird. Official business. Chief Rodriguez studied her face, clearly sensing that something wasn't right. Captain, you're not on the flight schedule today. Nobody cleared any maintenance inspections with me. Sofia looked at the aircraft, knowing that in about 30 minutes she'd either be flying it toward Turkey or sitting in a security office explaining why she'd attempted to steal a fighter jet. Chief, I need you to trust me. Can you prep this aircraft for immediate flight? Ma'am, I can't authorize flight operations for personnel who aren't on the schedule. You know that. Sofia moved closer, lowering her voice. Chief, remember what you told me about pilots who understand their aircraft? About how rare that connection is? Yes, ma'am. My brother and 11 other Rangers are trapped in Syria. They're going to die unless someone with mountain flying experience gets them air support in the next few hours. I'm the only pilot available who has that experience. Chief Rodriguez stared at her for a long moment. Captain, what you're talking about sounds like ... I know exactly what it sounds like. But sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the wrong rules. The maintenance chief looked around the flight line, noting that they were alone, except for a few technicians working on distant aircraft. Captain, if I prep this bird and something goes wrong, my career is over too. Chief, if I don't take this aircraft, 12 American soldiers die. Which outcome can you live with? Chief Rodriguez was quiet for nearly a minute, his weathered face showing the internal struggle between regulations and conscience. Finally, he picked up his tools and began the pre-flight inspection sequence. Captain, I didn't see you today. This aircraft developed a hydraulic leak that requires immediate test flight to verify repairs. Sofia felt tears forming in her eyes. Thank you, Chief. Don't thank me yet. Just bring my bird home in one piece. For the next 20 minutes, Sofia and Chief Rodriguez worked together to prepare the F-16 for flight. The maintenance chief falsified inspection records to show a required test flight, while Sofia planned her route to Turkey and calculated fuel requirements for the mission. As she climbed into the cockpit, Chief Rodriguez grabbed her arm. Captain, you sure about this? Sofia looked at the instrument panel of the aircraft she knew better than any other machine on Earth. Chief, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. She strapped in, started the engine, and began the taxi sequence she'd performed hundreds of times before. But this time felt different. This time, she wasn't just flying a training mission or routine patrol. This time, she was betting everything, her career, her freedom, her future, on her ability to save lives that the system had written off as acceptable losses. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. As Sofia lined up on the runway and pushed the throttles forward, she thought about her father's advice about creating your own opportunities to prove what you're capable. OF. The stolen F-16 lifted off into the Nevada sky, carrying with it the hopes of 12 trapped Rangers and the career of a pilot who refused to let bureaucracy triumph over brotherhood. The radio crackled with confused calls from the tower, but Sofia had already switched frequencies and was climbing toward the flight level where she'd intercept the first of several aerial refueling tankers that would carry her across the Atlantic. Behind her, Nellis Air Force Base erupted in chaos as controllers realized that an unauthorized F-16 had just taken off with a pilot who wasn't supposed to be flying. Ahead of her lay a 14-hour flight to a war zone, where she'd either save her brother's life or die trying. For the first time in weeks, Sofia Martinez felt like herself again. The first aerial refueling took place over the Atlantic 6 hours into Sofia's unauthorized flight to Turkey. The KC-135 tanker crew had been expecting a routine training mission when Sofia's F-16 appeared in their airspace, but her call sign and authentication codes matched their flight plan. The tanker pilot, Major Susan Walsh, had no reason to suspect that she was refueling a stolen aircraft piloted by a rogue captain on an impossible rescue mission. Sparrow 1-1, you're cleared for contact, Major Walsh radioed as Sofia maneuvered her F-16 into position behind the massive tanker. The refueling boom extended toward her aircraft like a mechanical lifeline, carrying not just fuel but the promise of continuing her journey toward Syria. Sofia guided her aircraft with practiced precision, connecting to the boom on the first attempt despite flying for 6 straight hours with minimal rest. As fuel flowed into her tanks, she monitored her navigation displays and calculated her remaining flight time to Turkey. The numbers were tight. She'd arrive with minimal fuel reserves and would need immediate clearance to land at Incirlik Air Base. Sparrow 1-1, you're showing good flow, the boom operator reported. Estimate completion in 8 minutes. During the refueling, Sofia's radio crackled with an encrypted communication on a discrete frequency. It was Colonel Stone's voice. barely audible above the static. Sparrow, be advised that your departure has been noted by higher headquarters. Multiple agencies are tracking your flight path and attempting to coordinate your return to base. Sofia keyed her microphone carefully. Copy. What's the status of the ground situation? Deteriorating rapidly. Weather is worse than forecast. Enemy forces are moving to surround the extraction point, and we've lost communication with the ground team. You have maybe a 4-hour window before conditions become impossible. The urgency in Colonel Stone's voice confirmed what Sofia had suspected. This mission was beyond the capabilities of conventional rescue operations. The combination of weather, terrain, and enemy activity required exactly the kind of specialized flying she'd spent 8 years perfecting. Understood. Request permission to continue to plan destination. Sparrow, I cannot officially authorize your mission. However, I can confirm that all available resources will support any aircraft operating in the area with appropriate qualifications. The coded language was clear. Colonel Stone couldn't order Sofia to continue, but she wouldn't stop her either. The responsibility for this mission rested entirely on Sofia's shoulders. After refueling, Sofia climbed to altitude and continued eastward across Europe. The flight gave her time to review everything she knew about her brother's situation and to plan her approach to what would be the most challenging mission of her career. The terrain Carlos had described was notorious among pilots: narrow valleys surrounded by peaks that rose above 12,000 feet, with weather patterns that could change from clear to deadly in minutes. Sofia's second refueling took place over the Mediterranean, where she encountered her first direct challenge to her unauthorized mission. As she approached the tanker, her radio exploded with official communications from multiple command centers. Aircraft calling sign Sparrow 1-1. This is Mediterranean Control. You are ordered to divert immediately to Ramstein Air Base in Germany. Do not proceed to Turkey. Sofia ignored the transmission and continued her approach to the tanker. The KC-135 crew had obviously been briefed about her situation, because the pilot's voice carried uncertainty when he established contact. Sparrow 1-1, we've been ordered to deny refueling and direct you to alternate destinations. Sofia felt her heart rate spike. Without fuel, she couldn't reach Turkey, and her brother's unit would be abandoned to die in the Syrian mountains. She keyed her microphone, choosing her words carefully. Tanker 17, I'm declaring a fuel emergency. I don't have sufficient fuel to reach any alternate destination. Request immediate refueling under emergency provisions. It was technically true. Sofia had calculated her fuel to reach Turkey with minimal reserves, and diverting to Germany would require more fuel than she currently carried. The tanker crew would be required to provide emergency refueling regardless of other orders. After a tense pause, the tanker pilot responded. Sparrow 1-1, cleared for emergency refueling. Make your approach. As fuel flowed into her tanks. For the second time, Sofia monitored multiple radio frequencies where various command centers were coordinating efforts to intercept her flight. She learned that F-16s from bases in Italy and Turkey were being scrambled to force her to land, while diplomatic channels were being activated to prevent her from entering Turkish airspace. But Sofia also intercepted communications on military frequencies that suggested her mission had support at operational levels. Ground commanders in Syria were tracking her progress and coordinating with Colonel Stone to provide whatever assistance might be needed. The contradiction between official opposition and unofficial support reflected the military's internal conflict. About her situation, Sparrow 1-1, refueling complete. Good luck with your mission. The tanker pilot's words carried personal warmth that suggested he understood what she was attempting. Sofia disconnected from the boom and climbed toward her cruising altitude, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether her gamble paid off or resulted in disaster. 2 hours later, Sofia approached Turkish airspace flying at low altitude. to avoid radar detection. Her navigation system showed Incirlik Air Base 60 miles ahead, but her radio was filled with increasingly urgent demands that she divert to other locations. Turkish Air Traffic Control had been notified of her unauthorized status and was refusing permission to enter their airspace. Sofia made a decision that pushed her even further outside legal authority. She descended to 500 feet above the Mediterranean and switched off her transponder, effectively disappearing from radar coverage. Flying this low required constant attention to avoid terrain and obstacles, but it would allow her to reach Turkey without being intercepted. The low-level flight along the Turkish coast was harrowing. Sofia navigated by visual landmarks while monitoring multiple radio frequencies for signs that fighter aircraft were searching for her. Her fuel reserves were dropping toward critical levels, and she knew that any mistake in navigation would leave her swimming in the Mediterranean. After 30 minutes of nerve-wracking flight, Sofia spotted the runway lights of Incirlik Air Base ahead. She climbed to pattern altitude and switched her radio to the tower frequency, knowing that her next transmission would either secure her mission or end it. Incirlik Tower, this is Sparrow 11, requesting immediate landing clearance for operational emergency. The tower's response was immediate and hostile. Sparrow 11, you are not authorized to enter Turkish airspace. Divert immediately or face interception by Turkish Air Force. Sofia could see Turkish F-16s climbing from the base, obviously. Scrambled to intercept her unauthorized flight. She had perhaps 2 minutes before they reached her altitude and forced her to land or engaged her as a hostile aircraft. Incirlik Tower, I'm declaring a fuel emergency and landing immediately. I have operational intelligence regarding American personnel in distress. Sofia dropped her landing gear and flaps, committing to a landing approach that couldn't be aborted. The Turkish interceptors were closing rapidly, but they couldn't engage an aircraft that was already in the landing pattern without risking civilian casualties on the ground. Sparrow 11, you are ordered to abort landing and proceed to holding area for escort. Tower, I'm below fuel minimums and committing to land. Emergency vehicles requested. Sofia touched down on Incirlik's main runway with her fuel gauges showing fumes. As she taxied clear of the runway, she was surrounded by security vehicles with flashing lights and armed personnel. Her radio crackled with orders to shut down engines and remain in the aircraft pending arrival of security personnel. But Sofia also heard a different voice on a discrete frequency. Colonel Stone directing her to taxi to a specific hangar where operational personnel were waiting. The competing orders reflected the chaos her arrival had created, with multiple agencies trying to assert control over an unprecedented situation. Sofia made her choice and taxied toward the hangar Colonel Stone had specified. Security vehicles followed her, but they didn't attempt to block her path. As she approached the hangar, Sofia could see personnel in flight gear preparing another F-16 that appeared configured for combat operations. She shut down her engines and climbed out of the cockpit to find herself face to face with Colonel Stone, a tall woman in her 50s with the weathered appearance of an experienced pilot. Standing beside her were several other officers, including a brigadier general whose expression mixed admiration with disbelief. Captain Martinez, Colonel Stone said formally, you've created quite a diplomatic incident. Ma'am, I've brought you a pilot with the skills to extract those Rangers. General Patricia Hayes stepped forward. Captain, I'm General Hayes, commanding the 39th Air Base Wing. What you've done is completely unauthorized and potentially treasonous. However, we have 12 American soldiers who will die without immediate air support. Sofia felt the weight of the moment. Everything she'd risked, her career, her freedom, her future, came down to this conversation in a Turkish hangar while her brother and his unit waited for rescue in the Syrian mountains. General, I've flown 180 combat missions in similar terrain. I know I can get them out. General Hayes studied Sofia for a long moment. Captain, if I authorize this mission and you fail, both of our careers are over. If you succeed but violate Turkish airspace or create an international incident, we face the same consequences. Why should I trust a pilot who just stole an aircraft and flew it across the Atlantic without authorization? Sofia thought about her father's letter, about doing the right thing even when it meant going against wrong orders. Ma'am, because 12 Rangers are going to die if you don't. And because the Air Force trained me to save lives, not to follow regulations that prevent me from doing my job. Colonel Stone pointed to the F-16 being prepared in the hangar. Captain, that aircraft is configured for the Syrian mission. Current intelligence shows enemy air defenses, hostile weather, and terrain that has defeated 2 previous rescue attempts. Are you certain you can succeed where others have failed? Sofia looked at the aircraft, noting the external fuel tanks and precision-guided munitions that would be necessary for the mission. Ma'am, I'm certain that I have to try. General Hayes made her decision. Captain Martinez, you are hereby temporarily assigned to the 39th Air Base Wing for operational purposes. Colonel Stone will brief you on the tactical situation. You have 1 hour to prepare for launch. As Sofia followed Colonel Stone toward the briefing room, she realized that her unauthorized flight had accomplished something she hadn't expected. It had forced senior commanders to confront the reality that regulations sometimes prevented the military from accomplishing its mission. Her theft of an aircraft had become an operational necessity that couldn't be ignored. The mission briefing revealed the full extent of the crisis in Syria. Carlos's Ranger unit had been inserted to extract intelligence assets, but their helicopter had been shot down during the infiltration. The 12 survivors were trapped in a valley surrounded by enemy forces, with rapidly deteriorating weather making conventional rescue impossible. The terrain is brutal, Colonel Stone explained, pointing to satellite imagery that showed narrow valleys surrounded by peaks shrouded in clouds. Previous rescue attempts have failed due to surface-to-air missiles and terrain masking that prevents effective air support. Sofia studied the maps, recognizing tactical problems she'd solved dozens of times in Afghanistan. Ma'am, what assets do I have for the mission? 1 F-16 with precision munitions, electronic warfare support from Navy platforms, and coordination with Turkish artillery for suppression of enemy air defenses. Weather is marginal and getting worse. Sofia nodded, already formulating her approach to the mission. Time on target? 2 hours. After that, weather conditions will make flight operations impossible. As Sofia suited up for the mission, she received a personal message from Carlos through secure communications. Sister, I don't know how you got here, but I've never been happier to see an F-16 overhead. We're ready for extraction when you are. Sofia smiled as she strapped into the cockpit of her second stolen F-16 in less than 24 hours. This time, she wasn't just proving that height didn't determine flying ability. She was proving that sometimes the most important missions required pilots willing to go beyond regulations to save lives. The mission ahead would be the ultimate test of everything she'd learned in 8 years of combat flying. Success would validate her belief that experience and judgment mattered more than arbitrary physical standards. Failure would cost her brother's life and her own freedom. As Sofia taxied toward the runway for takeoff, she thought about her father's advice about creating opportunities to prove what you're capable of. She'd created the ultimate opportunity. Now she had to prove she was worthy of it. The Syrian mountains appeared through Sofia's heads-up display like jagged teeth against the storm-darkened sky. Flying at 500 feet above the valley floor, she could see the terrain that had defeated 2 previous rescue attempts, narrow corridors between granite peaks, with weather that reduced visibility to less than a mile. Her F-16 shuddered through turbulence that would have grounded most pilots, but Sofia had trained for exactly these conditions. Sparrow, this is Ranger 6. Carlos's voice crackled through her headset. We're taking heavy fire from positions on the eastern ridge. 2. Wounded, ammunition running low. We need immediate support. Sofia banked her aircraft toward the coordinates Carlos had provided, using her targeting pod to scan the rocky terrain below. Through the swirling clouds, she could see muzzle flashes from enemy positions scattered among the boulders. The tactical situation was worse than the briefing had indicated. The Rangers were completely surrounded, with enemy forces holding the high ground. Ranger 6, I have visual on multiple hostile positions. I'm going to need you to mark your exact location. With smoke. Sparrow, negative on smoke. Wind conditions will blow it directly into enemy positions and compromise our concealment. Sofia cursed under her breath. Without smoke markers, she'd have to rely on precise coordinates and Carlos's voice guidance to avoid hitting friendly forces. The margin for error was measured in feet rather than yards, requiring the kind of precision flying that had made her reputation. Ranger 6, I need you to guide me using terrain features. Can you see the large boulder formation about 50 meters? North of your position? Affirmative. The main enemy machine gun nest is in those rocks. Sofia rolled inverted and pulled her aircraft into a dive angle that would thread her attack between the surrounding peaks. The F-16's computer system screamed warnings about terrain, proximity and minimum safe altitudes, but she ignored them, trusting her instincts and 8 years of experience flying in impossible conditions. Ranger 6, heads down. Danger close. The 500-pound precision-guided bomb left Sofia's aircraft at 1,200 feet above ground level, guided by laser designation that she maintained despite violent turbulence. The weapon impacted directly in the center of the enemy position, sending granite fragments cascading down the mountainside. Outstanding hit, Sparrow. Enemy fire from that position has ceased. But Sofia could see that neutralizing one position had only revealed the extent of the problem. Through her targeting pod, she counted at least 6 more enemy locations, each one positioned to cover different escape routes from the valley. The tactical situation required a level of precision that would challenge even the most experienced. Combat pilot. Ranger 6, I'm going to work the eastern ridge systematically. Keep your people low and be ready to move when I give the signal. Sofia's second attack run required her to fly parallel to the ridgeline, using terrain masking to avoid surface-to-air missiles while maintaining visual contact with the target. The enemy position was dug into a rock formation that provided natural protection from conventional attacks, requiring her to approach from a specific angle to be effective. The attack geometry demanded that she fly within 300 feet of the mountainside, close enough to see individual enemy soldiers scrambling for cover. Her aircraft's radar warning receiver screamed as enemy missiles locked onto her signature. But Sofia had anticipated this, releasing chaff and flares while pulling into a climbing turn that used the terrain to break the missile lock. Sparrow, you've got missiles inbound. Carlos shouted over the radio. Sofia could see the smoke trails of shoulder-fired missiles climbing toward her aircraft. She dropped to 200 feet above the valley floor, using the terrain to mask her signature while the missiles impacted harmlessly into the mountainside behind her. Ranger 6, I'm clear of missiles. Engaging targets on the western slope. The third attack run was the most challenging yet. The enemy position was located in a narrow crevice between 2 rock formations, requiring Sofia to thread her aircraft through a gap that was barely wider than her wingspan. The approach angle was nearly vertical, demanding precise timing and aircraft control that left no margin for error. Sofia rolled inverted and pulled her aircraft into a dive that pointed directly at the mountainside. For several seconds, it appeared that she was going to fly directly into the rocks, but at the last moment she pulled up sharply, releasing her weapon at point-blank range before climbing vertically to avoid the terrain. Jesus Christ, Sparrow. I can't believe you just did that. The explosion echoed through the valley as another enemy position was neutralized. But Sofia's aircraft had taken damage from debris and small arms fire, with warning lights illuminating across her instrument panel. Hydraulic pressure was dropping, and her flight controls felt sluggish. Ranger 6, I'm showing aircraft damage but continuing the mission. What's your tactical situation? Sparrow, enemy fire has decreased significantly, but we still have hostiles on the northern ridge. And we're running out of time. Weather is deteriorating rapidly. Sofia looked at her fuel gauges, noting that her extended time in the target area and violent maneuvering had consumed more fuel than planned. She had enough for maybe 2 more attack runs before she'd need to return to base or risk running out of fuel over enemy territory. Ranger 6, I'm going to suppress the northern positions. Then we need to execute immediate extraction. Are you ready to move? Affirmative. We have 2 stretcher cases, but we can move when you clear the way. Sofia's 4th attack run required her to fly through a narrow valley that was barely 400 feet wide, with enemy positions on both sides. The tactical situation demanded that she engage multiple targets simultaneously while avoiding crossfire from the RIDGELINEs. She approached the valley at maximum speed, using her aircraft's 20mm cannon to strafe enemy positions while releasing flares to confuse any remaining missiles. The attack lasted less than 10 seconds, but Sofia's precise fire neutralized 3 enemy positions and cleared a corridor for the Ranger's movement. Ranger 6, you're clear to move. Head for the extraction. Point at grid, coordinates 385,492. Moving now, Sparrow. Thanks for the cover. Sofia climbed to altitude and established an orbit over the extraction point, using her remaining fuel to provide overwatch while the Rangers moved across the valley floor. Through her targeting pod, she could see the 12 soldiers moving in tactical formation, carrying their wounded comrades toward the designated helicopter landing zone. Sparrow, this is Rescue 1, called the voice of the extraction helicopter pilot. I'm inbound to your location, but I'm showing heavy weather and reduced visibility. Can you provide approach guidance? Sofia looked at the storm system that was rapidly engulfing the valley. The helicopter would need precise navigation to find the landing zone in conditions that were rapidly becoming impossible for flight operations. Rescue 1, I'll guide you in. Follow my instructions exactly. There's no margin for error in this weather. For the next 15 minutes, Sofia served as an airborne traffic controller, guiding the helicopter through the mountain valleys, while monitoring enemy activity and coordinating with the ground forces. Her fuel gauges showed critical levels, but she couldn't abandon the mission until her brother and his unit were safely aboard the rescue aircraft. Rescue 1, you're 2 kilometers from the landing zone. Reduce speed and descend to 200 feet. Be advised of power lines crossing the valley at your 11 o'clock position. Copy, Sparrow. I have visual on your aircraft. You're my reference point. Sofia watched as the helicopter materialized from the clouds, its rotor wash creating a dust storm that obscured the landing zone. The pilot was flying entirely on instruments and Sofia's guidance, trusting her directions to avoid terrain that could destroy his aircraft. Rescue 1, you're over the landing zone. Descend vertically and prepare for immediate pickup. Rangers are ready to board. The extraction took less than 3 minutes, but it felt like an eternity as Sofia maintained overwatch with fuel that wouldn't last much longer. Her aircraft's engines were showing signs of fuel starvation, and she knew she had perhaps 10 minutes of flight time remaining. Sparrow, this is Rescue 1. All personnel aboard. We're departing the area. Sofia felt overwhelming relief as she watched the helicopter disappear into the clouds, carrying her brother and his unit to safety. The mission she'd risked everything to fly had succeeded, but her own survival now depended on reaching friendly territory with virtually no fuel remaining. Rescue 1, this is Sparrow. Mission complete. I'm returning to base with minimum fuel. As Sofia turned toward Turkey, her aircraft's fuel warning lights began flashing. The return flight would require every ounce of fuel she had remaining, with no margin for error or unexpected headwinds. But Carlos and his Rangers were safe, and that made everything else secondary. The stolen F-16 climbed slowly toward the Turkish border, its pilot knowing that she'd just completed the most important mission of her career. Whether she'd face court-martial or commendation for her actions remained to be seen. But 12 American soldiers were alive because she'd refused to accept that height mattered more than ability. 6 months later, Sofia stood in the Pentagon briefing room, wearing her dress uniform with a new ribbon on her chest, the Air Force Cross, the service's second highest decoration for valor. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was receiving the award in the same building where bureaucrats had decided she was too short to fly. "Captain Martinez," said General Patricia Hayes, now promoted and serving as Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, "your actions in Syria demonstrated that sometimes the most important missions require pilots willing to go beyond regulations to save lives." The charges against Sofia had been quietly dropped after congressional hearings revealed that dozens of experienced pilots had been forced out by arbitrary height requirements. The Pentagon had reversed the controversial regulations, citing operational necessity and the importance of retaining experienced combat aviators. Sofia was offered command of a new experimental squadron focused on precision operations in challenging environments. Her first assignment was training the next generation of pilots in the skills that bureaucrats had once deemed obsolete. "The Air Force is changing," General Hayes continued. "We're learning that diversity of experience and proven performance matter more than checking boxes on a regulation sheet." As Sofia accepted her medal, she thought about her father's words about creating opportunities to prove what you're capable of. She'd proven that courage and skill transcended physical measurements. That experience mattered more than arbitrary standards. Her brother Carlos, now fully recovered, watched from the audience with tears in his eyes. 11 other Rangers were alive because his sister had refused to accept limitations that had nothing to do with her ability to fly and fight. What did you think of Sofia's incredible journey from discrimination to heroism? Her story proves that sometimes breaking the rules is the only way to do what's right. If you believe experience and courage matter more than arbitrary standards, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Sofia's situation? Your support helps us bring you more incredible stories of people who refuse to accept limitations. Subscribe now and join our community of viewers who believe that true heroes are made by their actions, not their measurements.